He is the Managing Director and CEO of Invest India. Invest India is National Investment Promotion and Facilitation Agency promoted by the Government of India. Invest India is also the execution agency for Startup India and the Prime Minister's Science and Technology Initiative. In his professional career of over 3 decades, Mr. Bagla has worked with World Bank, Citibank, private equity firms, having responsibilities across Europe, Africa, and Asia. He is a member of several high-level government companies, including FinTech, Innovation, and Infrastructure. He is on the advisory board of the government's $7 billion fund of funds for MSMEs and the investment committee for the government $1.5 billion fund of funds for startups. He has a bachelor's degree in economics from St. Stephen's, New Delhi, and a dual master's in international diplomacy and international trade and finance from the School of Foreign Service, Georgetown University, Washington, D.C. Thank you, Mr. Bagla, once again for accepting our invite to be here. And in conversation with him today is Mr. Kalyan Bose, who you all know very well. He is the chairman and president of BBG Delhi. He is also the advisor and partner of Grant Thornton. He is the director of UK IBC and many more responsibilities that Mr. Bose has. So due to COVID restrictions, we had to limit the number of people that we can physically invite. But this event is being live streamed on YouTube for anybody interested to watch and be inspired by the leadership talk today. Over to you, Mr. Bagla. Thank you.
Thank you. Continues to be that. Thank you, Deepak. These conversations are more about trying to get to know the person a little better, as opposed to the official persona. So, Deepak, why don't you tell us where you grew up?
So there is no different persona. Same persona is professional and personal. Let me clarify that one. But it just feels good to be back home in many ways. And I remember those endless glasses of red wine we used to have, just to keep ourselves alive and continue the BBG discussions. Just to put it in perspective, in my previous life, I used to work for a British firm called 3i, a private equity fund. And that is where my entire relationship with BBG started. And Kalyan has always been leading that entire effort. It used to be good to see Kalyan and everyone else, all good friends, you know. And that's why I was asking him, how is the budget going with BBG? Because that was always a challenge at one point in time. We never used to get the fees coming in. So that's why I asked him, how could we afford a place like this? We could have rather done it in my office. But obviously you guys are doing well. So we are now on life. So it actually started from a small town. My father was in the civil service. And in India, you're elected the state government where you start your civil service and then you come on. So he was in the Punjab cadre. So I think a lot of my childhood was Chandigarh. And Chandigarh was very different at that time. It was quite a small town in many ways. So the mind is, I still like to call myself boy. I know she reminded me 3 decades over things. But the interesting part there is that even now if somebody asks me where do I belong to, it's always a very difficult question to answer. But the instantaneous answer is always Chandigarh. Do I think I've spent far more time in Delhi and in other cities apart from Chandigarh, because I spent my late schooling and early college was here. And then there were quite many years in Washington, D.C. with good memories. And then it was Mumbai for a very long time. And I think that's a great city to grow up in your single. And it's a very nice, interesting, professional place to be. But out of all those, I still somehow feel that a belonging, there is one, it is Chandigarh. And if I have to explain what that belonging is, why I'm speaking a little longer, because you'll ask me too many questions, and I may not have the answers. This is Supriya. But the fact remains is that the concept of relationships, which you picked up in Chandigarh from a smaller town, was far more different than what I experienced with others even when I was in Delhi, in my college and elsewhere. And somehow there was a blind faith and trust in every relationship you went into, with all your classmates and everything. It was a family. And then you would fight for each other, you would give your blood for each other.
But whatever that be, the concept of relationships comes from that small town. And I think that remains fairly well engraved.
So my relationship with BBG stands on that ground.
Okay, thanks. That's yeah, it's a different take. I wouldn't have known that. So your late school.
So why wouldn't you have known that? Are you questioning the relationship?
No, I think the relationships are very important, and you're really good at them. But I pride myself on being a big city guy. I've only ever lived in large cities. You know, anywhere smaller than London or Delhi is, you know, Hicksville. So, I don't think it stops relationships. I mean, relationships are not just about small towns or smaller cities, because I think, you know, large cities tend to divide up into small groups anyway. But I think that people want to know more about your views and what you think and where you've been coming from, rather than hear me speak. So you did your late schooling and early college in Delhi. You're Stephanian, I believe.
That's an institution of learning, it's not just a college. I just wanted to put it in perspective.
And what did you read there?
So I did economics.
Yeah.
But I must tell you, the big first jolt came is when I joined St. Columbus from my school in Chandigarh. Now this was the big metro boys, and you know, you have some of them sitting here. And we were from this small town. And mind you, the first time when you went into class, you were always trying to wonder, how do you pace yourself and how do you position yourself with these big metro types? And that was the first big challenge, which comes, you know, we're talking about small towns.
Yeah.
That's where it all originates from. So that's where if you see the small town people, and that takes me back to my Startup India. Sorry, I always take it back to Startup India. But the fact remains that there is an inherent positioning in you to be able to fight it out in the big world. And I don't want to sound as acrimonious as fight it out. And that's where I see the biggest thing for me is when I see the startups coming from my smaller towns and cities. In fact, half of my startups today, Rhiannon, you know this statistic because the last time when we were on a webinar together, I put it out, is from tier 2 and tier 3 cities of India. And the way they structure their business models, you know, also some of the big IPOs which you've just seen, which are happening now, of these startups, these are small town boys, each one of them. And you would have seen that the teams they built were based on very strong relationship links. These were not just teams which got together because there was a structural construct which had to be brought in that I'm good in marketing, you're good in finance into it. They started off with good, strong personal relationships. And somehow, and this is always a question which is out there in the professional world, because to a professional world they would not believe that that's the way to structure a company and that's the way to structure an entity. But you are now noticing that these structures which were based very strongly on personal linkages and relationships are the ones which are lasting much longer and delivering very well. And they're delivering value today. The second is their ability to fight it out, because there is this inherent desire to be able to make up to the others. You know, you have a lot of advantages which you miss out on when you're in a metro. You're a big boy, big city boy, no Kalyan, so you would know about it. But on everything, whatever there is, aspects of life which we take granted. For example, even if you drive at the Rashtrapati Bhavan, all that vintage, when we would come from small towns, it was a big thing. Even now, you know, one of the most interesting thing is, if you go there and you see the tourists coming in, from those small towns and villages, for them it is huge. That edifice and the ability to be there. And we often miss that. I'm speaking too much? You want me to stop?
No, no.
Okay.
It's fine.
So those kind of things are the elements which are now driving a large number of the business models which are now coming up in the startups. And I was having a similar discussion with the Naukri.com guy, Sanjeev Bichchandani, because we were school and college together. And he was the one who actually brought this point to that personal relationships of these people who are coming from the small towns and the linkages which they've created, apart from the fact that their ability to understand India is much better than those coming out of the 5 metros of India. Delhi is completely different from where we come from.
Yeah.
You know, so those things are changing enormously, and I think those were the things which constituted a large part of one's own growing up and value system, which happened. Stephens was interesting. You know, you're suddenly at the bottom end of the class because everybody there is a star, and before you get there, you think you are one, and that is a great leveler. I was just seeing the cutoff for Stephens admission in economics this year is 100%. It's insane, you know. But it was fairly as brutal even when we were trying to be there. And I remember I was awful in math. So in my first year I got 29 out of 50. And I had Rajat Kathuria, who heads ICRIAR, who got 32 out of 50, and he wanted to repeat it. I said, there's no way I'm going to repeat it because it's going to go down to 20. It can't be higher than that. But that class was really right up there. You know, we were just in New York last week when the Prime Minister was there, and I had dinner with 2 of them. And I was just sharing that with some of my colleagues in the office. We were just reminiscing about how life has taken all of us middle-class boys into a different world. One of them runs his own fund, which is a $7 billion fund. And the other one's a celebrated professor. He was the head of Michigan Strategy School, Michigan University, and now in Cornell, and now in the Hall of Fame. So that was a very interesting experience, but I would not say it was the happiest phase of my life.
Okay.
Because it was too intellectual, and I didn't think I could fit in there very well. But after that, it obviously took me to DC. That was a bit of a leveler, and that was fun.
So compare and contrast. I mean, why Washington in the first place? Why were you?
Actually, that was the place where I got admission, and they gave me full aid. So it was an easy choice. Nowhere else was I getting full aid. And it happened. I was the only Indian there. Actually, I was the first Indian in that school. The School of Foreign Service in Georgetown is actually a training ground for the US Foreign Service. You would know that, Ryan. And then they started taking in Foreign Service officers from 16 other countries. So actually, I was the only one who was neither and was the baby of the class, and I used to be treated as one. But that was a very interesting, very cosmopolitan experience which happened. And we had some very interesting professors. We had Dr. Henry Kissinger, and we had Madeleine Albright. So I was her assistant for over a year. And there was some very interesting learnings from these kind of individuals, you know. So I do remember asking Dr. Kissinger that, how should I address you after you finish? Should I still call you Professor, or should I call you Mr. Secretary? He said, your lordship will do. So I said, fine, I remember that. And in his office, there was this map behind him. It was a big map of Boston, and then it said the rest of the world. And that is what he said was the world map for him, and that is the world view. So that is how it all came about.
So comparing Georgetown with Stephens, or are they not comparable?
Stephens can't be compared, Kalyan. Stephens is.
Okay.
As I told you, it's a temple of learning. You can't ask anyone from Stephens to compare it with anything else.
Okay. So after Georgetown,
What happened?
the real world, a job?
So what happened after Georgetown was, thanks to a recommendation from Madeleine, I got a job at the World Bank. that was very staid and boring. You know, it was, World Bank is one, extremely bureaucratic. That's my view on it. And two is you're far removed from what you do to what you think there will be an impact of what you're trying to do. And it sort of does test your patience beyond a point. And then that was a time when you were wanting to do better. But by the way, the only thing which I ever wanted to do was journalism. And that's what I trained myself.
Yeah.
I took some journalism courses. And I interviewed after Georgetown for journalism. The only place which gave me an interview was the Boston Globe. And I remember the editor telling me that you'll have to sit on the desk, we won't set you out of the field because we don't understand your accent. And that's true. You know, I mean, I'm taking you back to the 80s, and that was a long time. And so I did the World Bank and then came back to India. And my first job in India was India Today. And I remember my first day, I had to write the obituary for Jagjeevan Ram. Jagjeevan Ram had just passed on. Dilip Bob was my editor at that time. Indrajit Badwar was the editor. Dilip Bob, he made me do that story 27 times. And it was just about 600 words. So that was completely, think that you will actually do it and you have to redo it. So that was short-lived, and that time India Today used to be a fortnightly, so it wasn't that exciting. Then joined Sunday. Have you heard of Sunday?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not many of you would have heard it, right? You heard of Sunday? Well, then it used to be a great weekly at one point of time. It actually had overtaken India Today. And I was on the political beat for North Block. And my first interview was with Mr. Chidambaram. And I loved his arrogance. You know, he really makes you feel that you're completely wasting his time and you don't even need to be in that room at all. And that wasn't learning by itself. The second time I got this one was, first it used to be Dr. Kissinger, that every time you entered his office it was like, you don't believe to be on the earth. And then it was him. And he had just come up with a process of evaluating IAS officers. So he had a feedback mechanism, and there was a lot of pushback from the government and the entire bureaucracy on that one, and I remember going and interviewing him. So that affair lasted about a year. I used to get 1,762 rupees a month. And the editor used to remind me every week at least that you're the highest paid I have, which I don't think it was true. But after that time came when I thought that I would sort of get settled in, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And I knew it couldn't be afforded on 1,762 rupees. So that's how Citibank happened. So there was an offer on campus in Georgetown from Citi. Just joined Citi. I never thought I'll be a banker in my life. Never ever imagined it. I never planned a career.
Yeah.
Just floating around and doing it. Now I've been speaking for too much. Nobody's having coffee. It's your turn.
Thank you, Deepak. So, becoming a banker, what did you find easy to do without having the training or the background? And what did you find a bit more challenging?
I tell you what I enjoyed about banking, of my life in Citi. One, it was Mumbai, we were all single. Two is you had a lot of others who were like me, so it became like a family there. You know, your evenings were well taken care of. These were people you could go and visit together, and your things to do. And I think that makes a big difference when you go to a place to work. And that's what we were trying to do when we set up Invest India. To me, the most important thing when we started setting up Invest India, and we started this in 2015 when the Prime Minister came. He wanted this agency to be set up. I just wanted it to be, as a workplace, a replica of what I did when I was in Citi. And when you like a place, you would work crazy, but you would party crazy too. And that's what I wanted this entity to be. So, you know, everyone who joins the entity, I do spend time with them. And the only thing which I look for is that fit with the rest of the team, with each one of them. Obviously, the workload for them is much more than we had, so none of them have that partying part. I really feel bad for them, really, and my apologies. But that I thought was a very critical aspect.
I think, so you're back to relationships. Relationships driving successful organizations.
And small town. and Chandigarh. Right. Complete rewinding it to that. It comes down to that, and that's where we saw city at that time used to be a fun place to be. And then happened 3i. So 3i happened, this is what I'm talking to you sometime in the late 80s, and 3i happened in 2007. So that was interesting. Two of us from Citi decided that we wanted to set up a fund. And 2006 we started this. 2007 is when the exciting things happened in the financial world, you recollect. And that's when we were out looking for funding for ourselves. We were looking to do an infrastructure fund. So 3i was the one which anchored us with the first $250 million, and then we got another $700 odd million from others. And we in fact invested only in infrastructure. So ports, roads. I couldn't get an airport. I was looking for that. But we were in 2009 to 2011, we were the single largest investors in India's roads. So we had 2,700 kilometers of roads, 13,800 megawatts of power, and the Krishnapatnam port, which is now the most modern port of India. That was an interesting experience. And working with 3i was a much more interesting experience because, explaining to them how India works used to be very interesting. So,
I mean, do you think part of that was because Citibank was in a market where it had competitors? 3i at that time in India, did it really have anyone that was effectively doing the same sort of things?
No. So we were the first infrastructure fund. But what was interesting of 3i had put some of its money into all kinds of interesting things into media. Some Nimbus, anybody of you remember Nimbus? Nimbus, it was all the cricket. They had the rights to the cricket and several other things. So the biggest funder for that was 3i. They lost all that money. Then they invested money in one of these out-of-home, these hoardings, the largest hoarding company. So they invested a lot in media and they lost on that side of the business a lot. So that's when they sort of contracted from that side of the business. Obviously, infrastructure had to stay because, and I think that fund is now towards the end of its winding up. And this is the time when they're going to be selling it back. It was interesting. It was a totally different life. So you see what happens in Citibank, you're on the sell side. You're always selling, you're in the sell mode. And suddenly, in the moment you move into fund managing, you're on the buy side. So the arrogance of the buy side is exemplary, I mean, it takes a long time because one was still in the sell mode. And we were still doing that. In fact, that was the biggest challenge when I was setting up Invest India. Because what you're trying to do is to create a sell side construct and a character of a firm within a buy side overhang. Government is buy side. I mean, you can't get anything more arrogant than the government, right? Except some of the fund managers. But here we were trying to create a completely sell-side construct. Even now they don't understand it in the government. That is where the big challenges come when you're trying to set these things up. And if you look at the history, very few sell-side constructs have worked within a government segment, anywhere in the world. So the World Bank recently just did a case study on Invest India last month. And they've actually shared it with all the heads of states across the globe, saying that this is how you can create an excellent organization within a short period of time. And one of the things they've highlighted is, as a threat to Invest India, that how long will you be able to keep this construct within a government entity? The pressure within the government all the time. The government likes to control.
Yeah.
Everything has to be controlled. Whatever they can. I mean, even if you have to, I remember when we were setting it up, one of the senior officials got down that what cars will be hired when you hire them. We need the models of those cars. It had gone down to that level, and here I was trying to explain to them that let's have a larger discussion on how we want to create this organization. We were lucky that in the present government context, there's a lot of freedom which is being given to entities. I can say one thing, till now, And today we are employers of choice. So the organization gets about 500 applications per position. And the only place where we send out our postings are to the IMs and the IITs, their internal groups. So we do get the best. And I must also add that we are now globally, and this was mentioned to us by Wharton, single largest contributor to Ivy Leagues and Cambridge and Oxford as a single entity. So what do I explain by that? So if you look at BCG India, not just as an example, not BCG globally as India or anywhere else. So it could be BCG US, BCG India or McKinsey US. As a single entity, I'm the single largest in the past 3 years where our people have gone to all these places, and most of them with aid. So be it Stanford, Harvard or wherever that be. That was a very interesting thing which has come up, is that we've not had a single person in this organization which has been because somebody pushed for them to come in. And in a government place, it is really tough. The other interesting thing in a government organization, you know, whenever you're working otherwise in a private place, you know who your boss is. And you know who the stakeholder is. You know who, so you know where direction you have to head and what you got to do. The challenge here is everyone is a stakeholder. And everyone has the power to get you out and close the organization. So it could be a member of the parliament who will walk in, or it could be just any other individual who will walk into the office. And you got to do the same song dance sequence. But one very interesting thing was we never got interference. We've had cases where people have suggested that could you look at this resume and things like that. But this team has had the sanctity and they decide. So it's for the team to decide. Second interesting thing, which Wharton pointed out to us again. By the way, they're doing a case study on us also. And so is INSEAD. I'm showing off a bit. That this is probably the only organization they have come across in the world which does not have a single career employee. So let me explain that. If it's a promoter-driven, even if you're a startup, the promoter is a career employee. He's there for as long, or in any other organization like yours, you're there. Everyone here is 5 years. That's it. There's no one who's a career employee in this organization. You can wind it up in 24 hours. That's a scary thing to think of.
Does it make a difference to, I mean, obviously it makes a difference to the culture. Does it make a difference to the results that the organization comes up with, do you think?
So I'll tell you what, we are in the very embryonic stage of coming. Just now it's driven by passion. I mean, each one of them has taken pay cuts of anywhere between 7 to 90% to come, because they've all come from places like yours. You guys obviously have deep pockets. But this is completely driven by passion because they want to make it happen. They want to show a new India. That's what I'm seeing. You know, I still remember we had the Russian Prime Minister walk into our office. This was just before COVID. And he said, this is the first time I'm seeing Modi's new India, starting from everything. So it was very nice, you know, and it's also fun when you're creating something new. When you're going to decide that which should be the fragrance in the diffuser in the pathway today. By the way, there was a research study done on that in the organization as to which diffuser fragrance, especially in the restrooms, is the best in Delhi. You want to take it?
Well, it's going to be less dangerous.
No, we picked it up from somewhere after that study was done. Do you want to take a call? Which hotel, and you know what used to happen? So we had investors who were visiting us, so this was a question which we put to them. Which hotel do you think rated the highest on the diffuser fragrance in their restroom? I'm sorry to bring down this conversation to this level, but...
Oberoi, yeah.
Anybody else? So you guys have a strong brand preference on the Oberoi, yeah? It's a good brand India's created. Think about it, you know, but it wasn't the Oberoi. It's the Imperial. Is it? And it's very interesting, you know, when you go down to that depth and level, and the question here was that everything starting from, so they designed their own office. And that was a big challenge within the government again to do it. But it's fun. So, when you're doing things like that, every day and every small thing is being given importance and every big thing is being given importance, it becomes a little more interesting. What it will be after 5 years, I don't know. Also because we were small, today we are 300. That's also a little bulky. I think this organization will be another 500-600 by the time. Also, it's spread out all over now. They're just doing too much. Everything, every element of what is happening in the system. And I'll tell you, the first wave of COVID, these youngsters, they created a helpline. It's called the Business Immunity Platform. And now it's a global gold standard. We were the only ones who did it as an IPA. They did not sleep night and day. They had over 12,000 queries, starting from a little child in Nasik who needed, she was a cancer patient who needed the medicine and all supply chains were locked, to a bread company calling up 2 in the morning that our trucks are on the border and they are not letting us in, to a chemical paint company which had 16 trucks across the country. And they said, and suddenly the lockdown was happening, and they said, if you don't take us into shade when the sun rises, they'll blow up. To all these kind of things, to those students in Kota, you remember those students in Kota where we had to organize 20 buses to take them all the way from there? Or getting queries like, we had this little person, this young lady in Bangalore who lost her father in Noida, and how a car was organized for her, so she got right through. And when you're passing from one state to the other, you needed a pass. How the team was up all night just to ensure she was not stopped. But the first wave was a little good in many ways because we had a success rate of about 90 to 95% of these issues which came in. And they were all across. From a call center not being able to operate out of Bombay, and they were processing global transactions of your credit cards, etc., getting those organized. Or helping Delhi police, how do you issue those curfew passes? The second wave was brutal. It just killed my team. When you would get a call that we need a bed and the person's going, and you don't even know that person, and 9 times out of 10 you can't help. And you never knew, and then 2 hours later you'll get a message saying that, the person's gone, don't worry. It killed everyone. And I lost a youngster, a 26-year-old. Can't forget. Every family was touched this time. This time it just killed everyone. And I think the mark it has left on each one of us, it has changed the way for everyone as a DNA on how you look at work, how you look at relationships, and how you look at life. And full points to them. They still worked day and night, from getting oxygen across, from seeing oxygen trucks which were blocked at borders and they were waking up at nights. And they are young. They used to get calls from hospitals and saying, if you don't get us oxygen in the next 2 hours, I'll have 26 patients gone. And my youngsters scurrying around trying to make that happen. It was brutal. But what was interesting is the ability to still do it and to get up and say, guys, we'll do. Their control centers, the oxygen, and all the working groups of the government, these were the teams which supported them, night and day. And even though they were hurt themselves. But yes, it was tough. The second wave, I think, all of us probably experienced it in a similar manner. Good learning.
Yeah. But, a tough place to be,
yes.
But getting through it.
Yeah, but it brought the team much closer. And what was interesting, so we had a lot of people who would leave us. When the first wave started, they all called back and said, we are joining you. They didn't take a single penny because the team was working round the clock, non-stop. We had 16 sub-teams. one creating masks, one creating ventilators, one creating curfew masks, passes. Poor Shruti, she was running around trying to explain to different parts of the government that what is essential services, you know, basic things like that. And there are new things which get added to an essential service. You would never realize that a rubber band is essential service, right? It's not in the list of essential services. And at that time it said that if it's an essential service, the truck will be allowed. But if you didn't have that rubber band, you couldn't make the mask. So this was, I mean, Shruti was leading that team, and I still remember every day that new things had to be added, and then you had to explain that to the state governments and everyone, because you needed to get it all going. I remember just to get that little girl her cancer medicine, which had to happen from some 400 miles away, opening that thing, getting a guy to run with that medicine, a motorcyclist, then a car, and then getting it. There were a total of 176 calls made. So it was, we had 17 sub-teams. Ventilators, they picked up the startups, got them attached to bigger companies like the automobile companies. All that was happening. We had a separate logistics team trying to organize aircrafts. We had to pick something from China, we can pick up something, you know. When you wear your mask, there's a layer inside. Now that layer, the chemical for that is not made in India. And it was impossible to get it because you have to get it from Singapore or China. China, everything was blocked. Singapore, we were trying because you don't have aircrafts at that point of time. Now, if you get an aircraft, you need to get the full load going. So they were working on getting loads onto that aircraft. How do you make that happen? The second wave, I think they were working very actively on getting new hospital beds, getting oxygen to the right places, medicines, and then trying to get the donors and getting all that going. So yes, eventually look at it as a country. And you know, we often forget that. I was just talking about it the other day. Even in the worst lockdown in human history, by the way, we are a very self-critical society, which is good. But in some ways, at times, we go a little off. In 18 months, you gave free food, 60 million tons of it, to 800 million people. You've done 800 million vaccines, right? So far. You know, you often forget when we started the lockdown on the 26th of March. On the 27th of March, there were only 2 places in Delhi which were doing an RT-PCR test. And they could only do 150 a day. That's it. We did not have a single PPE in India. 27th July, you had more PPEs which you exported to the other parts of the world, including Europe and the US. Everything was changed, business models were pivoted, small startups came up with solutions, big companies were brought in, they were nimble and they were executed at this pace. And even during this lockdown, I was just seeing the statistics, 50 million households got a new drinking water tap. That didn't just mean that the tap was put in there. You know, you need to put a line, you need to put meters and everything, all in the midst of a lockdown. It's unbelievable. And we all lived through it. And by the way, they were also doing the free food service. So they created food and how to make it happen. It's a fascinating experience. I think another few years when we look back on how a society can get together at a time when the worst enemy is everyone else except you. There's no one close to you, right? And yet how they mustered in together to make it all happen. Sorry, I don't think we need to have such a morbid conversation at this time of the day. But it's... You should hear it from them, this team. You know, my belief in what the youth here can do and what they will is unimaginable after that.
How do you see that experience and expertise being put to use going forward?
The basic thing, Kalyan, which is what we miss out, is a faith and a trust that we can do it. That's it. To my mind, if you ask me, the biggest thing which has happened in India, one, I firmly believe we are at one of the most defining inflection points in our history ever, where India is concerned now. Okay? And I've always been saying it. Never before you had transformation at such scale and pace as which is happening today, and it's all because of, if I have one single thing, is digitization. The digital India thing, it's just taken off completely. But with that, what has come is a mindset change. A mindset that yes, we can. And it's not just an election slogan which we may have picked up from somewhere else. But that's what I see in all of them, and a confidence. Everything has a solution. We did not.
Yeah.
My generation did not. This generation does.
And you're seeing that in the private sector, in the startups, in the established companies.
This is a societal change.
It's right across.
This is a societal change. I don't know if you've been looking at the matrimonial ads. That's a question for you, Kalyan.
No,
Oh, fine.
no, I'm not.
Okay. The reason why I say that, you must. I remember when we had joined Citi and we had to go in higher, and Citi at that time was an employer of choice. I'm talking of the 80s and the 90s. You would believe that. So we would go to IIM Ahmedabad. We would take 10, 20. So we'd go one day before. It's called day one. Okay? And that's when the good students are out there. You would make an offer to the top 20. All those 20 would accept, and it's done. Today, last year, IIM Ahmedabad class, of the top 100, only 16 joined a corporate. The rest did their own startups. Now, why I was talking about your matrimonial ads, and so not your, I mean, looking at a matrimonial ad, is today there are matrimonial ads stating that if I'm doing a startup. Why do I bring this to you? I remember January 2016 when Prime Minister was going to launch Startup India. So we were doing the briefing points. And one of the things we'd written is that you must stress that we should celebrate failure. You know, we were all, there was no way you could think of joining or doing something which you knew would not last beyond or could not last. Mm-hmm. That mindset has changed. Today, this generation does not care about that. They need a purpose. They're not here just for the money. I'm telling that also for your organization.
Yeah. No, I think it's quite apparent that there's much more of an entrepreneurial mindset, and as you said, entrepreneurs learn from failure.
Yes.
Successful entrepreneurs have failed and then gone on. And
by that logic, I could have been a very successful entrepreneur. The list of failures is immense, but I still couldn't take it on.
You still can do.
After you.
No. There's one thing that we've not talked about before. In November 2008, you were in Bombay.
Yep.
And at a very traumatic and tragic time.
Yes. So if you look at moments, everybody has a moment in their life. Yes, that was mine. So what Kalyan is referring to is 26/11, when that happened. I don't know how much detail I should go into it, but I'll just walk you through with a bit.
Yeah.
So I remember I was at the Oberoi, the Indian restaurant there, and Michael Queen, who used to be a part of your cabinet at one point of time. And Michael was, at that time, the head of 3i. So he was in town. And the Indian restaurant at the Oberoi is on the first floor. Right? So when you enter, the sea is right in front, and the kitchen is on your left. So I remember a table was booked for us at 9. We reached there at 9:15. Michael was late because I think he couldn't get his tie right. And we walked in and the lady told us that that table's gone, but we're getting you a table right next to the kitchen door. And I was grumbling about it. And I remember when we walked there, the guy from Yes Bank, our friend, he waved up to me because he had got that table. And he said, sorry, if you don't mind, we can continue. I said, yeah, that's okay. And I hear we were sitting right next to the kitchen door. And then we heard some noise and things. So we heard some bullets being fired. I didn't think it was a bullet. So Michael said, do you think something dangerous? I said, no, don't worry about it. The Indian wedding keeps happening. Became a little closer. So I said, don't worry, they're just passing through. So it's a wedding thing, they're a little more excited. Suddenly what happened, the glass door crashed and there was firing right through. And the first table to go was that table which was booked for us. I saw two of them and they were just spraying. It was right next to the kitchen door. So I held Michael by the hand and I said, Michael, let's run. And we didn't know what to do, so we just ran through the kitchen door. And I remember there was these big fridges and Michael said, should we hide behind them? I said, Michael, let's just run. We came to another flap door. We got out. There were steps going down, steps going up. I said, let's run up to my room. I was on the 12th floor. So we ran up and Michael was on the 16th. So we went to our room. I was there and I had no idea what was happening by then. We just heard, nobody knew that this was there. We switched on the TV. This was about 9:40. 10:30, both of them down, and they were in the room next to mine. So every few hours, there would be a lot of howling, screaming, crying, and the bullet would shot and silence. By that time, your entire friends group, my Columbus friends group, Stephens, Chandigarh, and it had all gone that I was there. And you should never take a phone call at this point of time, so it was just SMSs happening. And it's very interesting that, in times like this, our language to convey what we feel is very limited. Of those 800 odd SMSs, there were only 3 which would cover 67% of them. Don't worry, we are there. You will be out soon. And some said, Ki Hanuman Chalisa padho. Hanuman Chalisa is Lord Hanuman's thing. This continued happening for a while. Thursday night, Thursday afternoon, if you recollect, they set fire to the room next door. Because by that time, the NSG had moved in, the National Security Guards. So there was smoke bellowing right through. And I remember that if the smoke comes in through the window, we can't open the window. So in the middle also, on Thursday morning, Michael said that can we try something by opening the window and jumping out? So what we did is there were 6 bed sheets. In a hotel room, if you have double bed, you have 6 sheets. You can ask me, I'll tell you. So you tie them, we wet it, then we tied it and made it into a knot. I tied it. By the way, Michael had had a heart attack just 3 months before. So I was just concerned that he doesn't get into that scenario again. So I used to have an antacid pill with me and I used to give it to him every night in the morning. He would not eat anything, nothing. I'd created a bunker in the room. I'd taken wet towels and I'd blocked all the vents. And I'd given him 2 small wet towels that in case smoke bellows, you cover your nose with it. So we tied up all those sheets and we realized that it wasn't good enough to jump. 2, he said, should we break the window? I said, we break the window, then we'll become the suction point for the entire building. So that's also not a good idea. So we were just sitting there with onwards. I had filled the tub with water. I had filled the basin with water. I had wet the towels and I'd blocked the vents with those towels. So those, within each pen there is that lead which comes out. So you use that to put, because I thought that what they had done in Pakistan, that they would put fire, so you would have smoke bellowing in and then you're gone for sure. And I used to give him an antacid pill every evening, Michael, because he just had that heart attack, so I never knew what was going to happen. What used to happen is every 3-4 hours you'll hear a bullet. So before that there'll be a lot of crying, and then they'll be silent. This continued. Thursday night we were sure we won't walk out alive. There's nothing at all. Thursday night there was a lot of firing, this, that, etc. Friday, is when the firing increased, and then I got a call on my phone. We were just sitting there, and I didn't know should I pick up that phone or not. But I lifted it because it was making a noise, and I thought they were in the room next to mine. Because what they had done is, they had picked up those 4 hostages from the 18th floor, we were on the 12th floor. They brought those hostages down, they were in the room next to ours. So every 6-7 hours, they would shoot one hostage. What we would hear is a lot of crying noise, bullet shot, silence. We didn't know how many were there, what was happening. So all this was happening, and the phone rang, and you didn't know what to do. You didn't want that noise to happen, so you just picked it up. And he looked at me and said, "You screwed up. Why the hell did you answer that phone?" But we picked it up. And this person said that, "I'm from the NSG, from the National Security Guard. We just wanted to know if you're there, if you're okay." And probably they were doing that to each and every room. That you stay in the room, we'll take care of you. By 2:30 is when they came, and we were one of the first we rescued down. Sorry, no, one of the last, because they started from the 18th floor. They would come down one by one, room by room. And it's very interesting with the way the NSG comes. There are 5 of them, they'll cover you, and they run you down the steps, and they take you there. What was the most interesting thing about that entire experience is that it takes you to a completely different edge in your mind. On Thursday, I was sure we will not be back out. I was 100% sure of that. If until then somebody asked me, what was the most defining point of your life, I didn't have one. Today, if you do, I do. And I remember when I landed in Delhi, I was coming down the aircraft, and my 2 boys came running up to me. You didn't want anything else in life. Nothing else mattered. And that was the time when you realized that the fragility of life and how it takes you is totally very different. And it's so fragile because I still remember when we were running down those steps, these guys had given us cover and we were not taking down the lift. And I asked this NSG guy, I said, "Have you had anything to eat?" He said, "Sir, not yet. We'll put you to safety and then we'll do." This was going on for 3 days and nights. But it completely changes life for you. Totally. And I remember after that, Michael was flown back. He was working for 3i and he became the chairman of 3i and he was a minister. He couldn't eat for 3 months. The entire inside had blisters because there was so much acidity which had come up. We couldn't eat anything for those 3 days. I used to try and give him a biscuit or a cup of tea. He could not take anything. I was worried that he had a heart attack, that what would it happen later. But one of the best things of an experience like that, it changes your mindset completely of what life is all about. It brings you down to the very basics. And you suddenly realize that you have a lot of friends. I remember my entire school crowd, which was in Delhi, which was in Chandigarh, which was in college, which was overseas, had reached out at that point of time, sending their SMSs and everything like that, And we were sitting there preparing ourselves on whatever that could be done. But yes, things like that define you to a large extent. And that's when I decided that I will not work for money. So that's when private equity got over.
Thank you for sharing that. Deepak.
No, it's
That's very...
please. Not at all.
I think we're...
Sorry, I got carried.
No. Thank you very much, Deepak, for the time you spent with us, but also the amount of yourself that you've shared. We're very privileged and very happy about that. Thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Tarun, who's
Shit, sorry guys. Get carried away. I know I'm taking too much time.
No.
We can go on listening to all
Yeah.
Oh, please.
such a great wealth of experience and your personal perspective.
I hope nobody has to go through this experience.
We're running short of time, or else we would have asked people to have their questions. But I'm sure we can extend it to the networking. I now call upon Tarun Singhal. He's the treasurer of British Business Group Delhi, to extend a small token of gratitude to Mr. Bagla and give his vote of thanks.
It's a long thing you've written, Tarun.
So many people could have.
So while Ruchi is getting the souvenir, so once again, thank you, Mr. Bagla. Thank you, Kalyan. I think you have actually created a different kind of environment and energy in all of us. And I think what you went through, also what last 18 months have taught each one of us, is something which is remain grounded. I think that's most important. And it's so lovely to see all of you here in person. I mean, and I think it's a wonderful evening in a physical format after many, many months. And special gratitude to you, Mr. Bagla, for what you have shared with us. I would also like to thank the committee and the members of British Business Group who are in this room, both the existing and the potential members, for their presence and participation today. I also would like to thank Mr. Vikramaditya Singh, the CEO of the Claridges, for his help and hosting us at this beautiful venue. And he's suggested that once you're walking out, don't forget to peep in at the newly renovated Pickwick's, which is on the Charles Dickens theme. And finally, also, I would also like to thank our logistics partner, Hari Shankar, and his team for this. Last but not the least, this would not have been possible without Ruchi. So thank you so much, Ruchi, for everything. And also, please stay tuned for many of these series. I think Ruchi has some things planned every month or every 2 months. So we'll, depending on how scenario takes up, hybrid, partially hybrid, or in full physical format. And I think with this, we come to an end with a formal session. And let's have some informal networking drinks together. We have some very interesting people in the audience here. I can see dear friend Aparna here from British Airways. You can talk to her. I read that British Airways have inducted A380 recently, so you can tell everybody about that. We've got Sumit Gosai from Air Vistara, who can talk about his experience, and also you've launched your Paris flight recently, so you can tell people about that. We've got lawyers, we've got other people, and we've got dignitaries from the High Commission. I would also want each one of you to please give a big round of applause for Mr. Bagla and Mr. Bose.
He's the star, always.
And a much louder applause, pardon me saying that, for Shruti and the team, the way they led all the pandemic research. Shruti will be happy to share some of the experiences and learnings while we are getting outside. So, Ruchi, may I please?
They're truly absolute stars, I must say that. Exceptional team and full points. I'm being spoiled? Thanks, always a pleasure. Thank you. You guys are obviously on a high budget these days. In our times, we could never try to do these things. But thank you very much. Truly. Thanks for being so patient.